Welcome everyone to Defending Our Children. Today we have on with us a very special guest. He's a longtime friend of mine, and he is a fire chief. Not just a fire chief of a special type of station. I'll let him tell you about it, but everybody, please welcome to the show, Mr. Steve Simon. Steve, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thanks, Craig. Good to see you, man, as always. Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a battalion chief for a large fire department in a border state in the southwest region of the United States. We have a regional system. They tell me our system is the second largest fire department in the country when you put all the cities together in the area that I live in. So we do see a lot of things. We do get a lot of money into this region from DHS being close to being a border state, as you know. What Craig's talking about, a battalion chief of special operations. So I've been in the special operations world pretty much post 9/11. So when 9/11 happened, a lot of things changed in the fire service and the police departments and Homeland Security. We put all these fusion centers in around the country. We started sharing information, and the fire departments, believe it or not, bring in a lot of intel. We're one of the last agencies in the United States that were welcomed into people's homes and businesses, clearly without a search warrant. So let the firefighters in, and we've taught our firefighters see something, say something, and it's a great way to bring in some intelligence. But I want people to understand the fire department's not out there doing that. We're not out there spying on people. We're not looking at things. But if we see something, we have an obligation and a duty to act. But anyways, so that's what I do. My specialty is the special operations world, funded by Homeland Security, FEMA, special operations, technical rescue, hazardous material, air rescue, part of a UASI, one of 28 teams. I'm on a task force 1 in the state of Arizona. We deploy all over the country. There's 2 international teams that do deploy for FEMA. So that's the world I live and operate in. 3.5 more years left to go.
Right on.
So
well,
I'll be a free man.
We appreciate, yes, sir. We appreciate your service out there, and who can find fault with the firefighter profession? I've been encouraging my son to go into that line of work, and man, you guys rescue so many people in so many ways. And just knowing you and Paul and others on my wife's side, a lot of her relatives, in-laws are in the firefighting profession down south of Tucson. And so
Yeah.
there's a whole big string of them. We went to a funeral a few years back, and man, the place was packed, and there were so many memories, and he had given so much. So I've got a special place in my heart for firefighters, and I'm sure many do, whose friends and families have been rescued over the years in all kinds of crazy ways, because there's people get themselves into some silly situations and horrific situations. Yeah. I mean, even just in between Tucson and Phoenix, sometimes I've seen catastrophic situations where both sides of the highway are backed up for many, many, many miles, and there's helicopters there, and there's firefighters and paramedics, and 18-wheelers have burnt up, and there's carnage and mayhem. And I'm like, man, that God bless the people that do this work, because man, if you're pinned in a car and it's burning or whatever, I mean, it's everything to have somebody that's trained and qualified and willing to get you out of that situation. Begs a few questions, like, why didn't I just go a couple miles an hour slower or whatever? But anyway, so we want to talk about the children primarily. I know you see all kinds of things out there, and I enjoy hearing the stories over the years, but the show is Defending Our Children, and we talk about a lot of things, some pretty heavy things, child trafficking and all the abuse. But just from a practical angle, from your perspective, you guys go and you deal with all kinds of things, and inevitably, I'm sure children are a percentage of what you're encountering out there, Steve. So what kind of things are you seeing that children are vulnerable to? How are they getting harmed that you're seeing in your line of work? And let's just cover some simple solutions for that, so we can protect them from it. How about you?
You're right. We do have a lot of incidents. Obviously, being a large metropolitan fire department and region, we're running hundreds of thousands of calls a year for service. And let's just face it, some of those calls, a majority of those calls are going to be for children. People of all ages are not immune to emergencies and good or bad things happening to them in their life. And it's we see it all the way down from something that's tragic all the way to drownings, child abuse, child getting into something, a product, a chemical, a prescription drugs, even as they get older, getting into drug abuse. I mean, we've seen it all the way to us in this group are gun owners. And so you have people out there that possess guns in their houses, and they're just not, I don't know what it would be, either educated or are responsible. And unfortunately, sometimes those kids get a hold of those weapons and things happen. I mean, we've seen it all the way down to years ago. I remember responding on a call on the west side of town where it was a stash house, and the coyotes were bringing trafficking people across the border. I mean, there's people of all ages in that group, and ICE was there with the big Greyhound buses loading the people up onto the buses, and we had to medically treat some of these people. They had a lot of people crammed into this house on the west side of town to where the coyotes would bring them up. Horrible conditions, but once again, for where your show goes, we've had children in that instance all the way up to elderly adults. People want freedom, right? So they want to come up here and they want the American dream that's always preached throughout the world. And unfortunately, they go through great lengths, as we see, to get that. But I mean, we see it all. We don't see a lot of that. When we're getting calls for service, we're seeing where children are getting harmed by just, it's unsupervision is the best way to put it, right? And that's the other thing we see today in today's society, that both parents are working, or they're single parent families, and somebody's working, the kids are left unattended, they're at home. Like you said it, I've seen a lot. We could go on and talk hours on it.
Well, I think we've seen a lot of the fentanyl stuff that in our operations down on the border, Arizona and Texas. It's not a small situation. I mean, we're losing more people a year than we did in 10 years of warfare in Vietnam, just from fentanyl alone. It's insane what's happening. So maybe let's start by cracking open the drug problem. How do we keep our toddlers and children out of our prescription drugs? And maybe we'll start talking about the fentanyl and how to educate our children against the harms of that, and just some practical solutions. And then maybe going into teens and what you see with teens getting into the drugs. And for example, our daughter once said that they were having a farm party, and that was PHARM party. This was once in early high school, and they were all going to bring mommy's prescription drugs, and they were all going to take them at this party. It was just unthinkably foolish. We've got to cut to a break first, but on the other side, let's jump into that. So folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back with more on defending our children. Welcome back to Defending Our Children, everybody. We are on with Steve Simon, and he is a fire chief of a spec ops unit in the Southwest United States. And man, he sees all kinds of things. And we're just cracking open the discussion of pharmaceutical drugs in the home, in addition to things that are a threat to everybody now, like the fentanyl that we're seeing, that's so pervasive. So Steve, maybe take an example or a few, and just kind of what situations are you seeing where, let's start maybe with the little children and work our way up all the way to the teens. How about you? And just kind of learn about what you're seeing and safeguards from it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when you get into the smaller children, usually with the smaller children, it's them getting into mom and dad's prescription drugs by accident when you're dealing with the little kids in the home. But that's not true for all cases. The other problem I will see in our organization, we have a Homeland Security division, and they work for Homeland Security, and they work for the Fusion Center. So every now and then they're going to send us bulletins on information we need to know. One of the bulletins I see periodically that comes down the pipe when you talk about the drugs, for the younger kids, they look like little candies, and that's what they're showing us. They'll show us look like gummy bears,
Sweet tarts or something, right?
yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
so that's how these kids somehow, if they get exposed to it, it gets in their possession, and usually that'll come and get in their possession. Older siblings, or who knows, but there's no telling how they get it. But when they do get it, it looks like candy. So the younger kids will get into that.
Well, I remember when I had to have been about 3 because it was in our first home before we moved into the family homestead that my parents lived in and I grew up in. And we all lived there for 50 years. I would have had to have been 3 years old because we moved after that. But I remember standing on the counter in the kitchen countertop and opening the cabinet, and I got into some baby aspirin. And I don't know
Yeah,
how I got that bottle open, but I had eaten most of a bottle, apparently, of baby aspirin.
absolutely.
And I don't know why I did it, but the coating must have tasted good or something. But I remember then being in the backyard and I became sick, throwing it up. And my grandpa was holding me in his lap and he had a towel and he was, helping me make sure I was safe and getting the nasty taste out of my mouth. And of course, they were very concerned. They were probably scared to death that I'd eaten all that. As soon as they looked over and saw what I was up to. So, man, it doesn't take kids long to get into harm's way, and it's, some of the times we fuss about the difficulty of these child-proof caps, and sometimes they're parent-proof caps. You can't get into medicines that you need to, but man, it's really, it's smart that they have that, because the little ones, man, they just toddle around and what do we do when we're little? We put everything in our mouth because we want to figure out what it tastes like,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the little ones get into trouble. And I remember that as well, Craig, as a kid. The baby aspirin was like candy. And are you remember the Fred Flintstone vitamins? So that's where the little kids get in trouble. But then as they get into junior high, middle school, junior high, and then go into high school, then that's where they really get that exposure. And that's where they're buying the drugs, or like you said, your daughter going to the farm party where they're draining mom and dad's medicine cabinet and they're throwing it all in. I'll tell you another problem today that we're seeing, not necessarily through the fire service. I know we probably have some engine companies or fire companies that are running on it with paramedics, but these TikTok challenges, social media challenges, where you see these kids taking a bottle of Benadryl or whatever, and they don't understand that the consequences of shutting their kidneys down or destroying their liver, and the problem with that. And then the other thing you see today in some of these kids, and I remember running on these calls with teenagers when I was out on the fire trucks, they wanted attention, so they'll do an overdose. So then they take a bottle of Tylenol. They don't understand that this whole bottle of Tylenol they just took might destroy their kidneys and has lifelong consequences to their health. So that's another problem. These kids, they think, and same with some adults, they think these drugs that they're buying off the shelf are benign, but they're not. And that's where they get themselves in trouble.
Yeah, it's tragic knowledge is power, just like anything else, man. The more you know, the more you can protect yourself from that which is harmful. And it's concerning to see how many of these youth are misguided and don't know that these things can be very, very dangerous. And like you said, lifelong consequences. It's not just a game where you're gonna have a bad day and then it's okay. It's like, no, you've done lifelong internal organ damage, and it'll come back to bite you later, if not right now.
Steve, have you seen, for example, on TikTok, a TikTok challenge, have you seen anybody suffer from something as benign as the cinnamon challenge?
I've heard about it, not in the fire service though. I've heard about it just out on social media, or you'll see a story online, you're reading online, and you see something about it. I do remember reading about the cinnamon challenge and some of the things about that. But to be honest with you, I have not heard of one of our firefighters talking about going on that call or dealing with it. I don't know much about it, but I do know something about it.
I was curious because I've seen, I saw some YouTube videos of people doing that, and you could easily choke on something like that. And one thing about kids, I mean, these are a lot of times teenagers and adults, but kids like to emulate that behavior. So you can get an 8-year-old kid, 9, 10-year-old kid doing something and choke on something as benign as cinnamon. So I didn't know if you'd had any experience with it or not.
Yeah, so that goes back to the point for us where these kids, they get themselves in trouble by some of these social media challenges that are going around. I mean, remember not too long ago they were eating those Tide pods and just stupid things like that, which it just comes down to, once again, that comes down to how are we educating our kids as parents? How involved are we as parents, protecting them and teaching them those little things we take for granted, right? In our everyday life. Here's the biggest thing I've seen in my career with people, and I mean, we're all guilty of it. It's not going to happen to me. It can't happen to me. And
Bingo.
I mean, you're calling the statistics say you're going to call 911 2 or 3 times in your life. So, and that's part of the problem we run into. We have to get out of that mindset. And especially if we're raising kids, it's our ultimate responsibility as parents and adults to protect our children. That's being aware of these things that can harm our children, especially as they get older. And you're talking about the fentanyl that's pouring across the border into this country. I mean, that's lethal stuff, to where years ago in the fire service, we had to change our medical gloves that we were wearing, because once you touch that stuff, being transdermal, you see it with these cops. They go and they make an arrest and they pat somebody down. They come in contact with that fentanyl. All of a sudden, they're in respiratory arrest. So that's how bad this has become and how lethal this stuff is. So we really have to protect our kids from it, because that's the other problem with these drugs that kids are buying and getting exposed to. They're laced. Nothing's pure anymore. And so now you're seeing, one of the things we run on a lot as a fire department is overdoses.
Yeah.
And people, they're getting these drugs, and they think, let's say maybe I can't go into the drugs. I really don't know them all that well.
Welcome back to Defending Our Children, everyone. We are on with Fire Chief Steve Simon. We're talking about drug overdoses and how to protect our children from it. Steve, what are you seeing out there these days?
Yeah, the drugs are they're prevalent out there in society, as we know, and they're pouring into the country. Let's just put it this way: they're not hard to get, and they're very abundant out there. Our children are definitely very susceptible to drugs. When they're in the school system, it's not hard for them to get, as they get exposure to other kids that have those connections. Let's just face it. I think we remember back in the day when we were in school, you could buy marijuana from, kids. That just hasn't changed. And I think back then, I remember, I really wasn't into the drugs, but I remember kids talking about, marijuana, acid, and maybe cocaine. But today, I mean, it's a whole different ball game. And that's what we really have to be worried about, is the fentanyl, the carfentanil, the drugs that are laced. And really, as a parent or a guardian of a child, we take things for granted. This is what we see in everyday life. Is you see the parents, they put their kids on the bus or the car, they walk out the door and they go to school. One of the things we hear about, how many parents and how many family units are sitting down at dinner and having those conversations, right? And coming together as a family. I don't know many people today that do that. I work with some guys on the fire department that I know that's really important to them, and great. That's awesome that they do that. I thank God my kids are grown. I have grandkids, and my kids made it out alive. That was my fear. So, talking from my own experience as a parent, I was very diligent teaching my kids. I knew from being a firefighter, when they went into middle school, I knew that these drugs looked like candy. So when they were young, I told my kids, it was my responsibility and my wife's responsibility to teach them, you don't take candy from a stranger. And
Right.
how cliche that sounds, It's so true because they've made, as we spoke earlier in this podcast, we talk about how these drugs look like candies, and so that's appealing to a kid. But even when they get into middle school, you have to stress that, and you have to stress these drugs that we're dealing with today will kill you.
Yeah.
And I think where I was fortunate with my kids back when I was on, before I became a battalion chief, when I was on the fire trucks, I had the ability and I did it. I had daughters or have daughters. I made my kids come down to the fire station. I put them on the fire truck and they went on calls with me. And there's not a day in the city that I work for that there's not multiple overdoses. That's just a reality of life that, 70 something fire companies, they're running on overdoses. And some of those are going to be children. Some of those are going to, it's all across the spectrum. So as a parent, sticking to the podcast and protecting our children, that's our ultimate responsibility. You have to understand how prevalent those drugs are out there. The access to these drugs is incredible. It's not hard for the kids to get. They're not expensive. Back in the day, kids that I went to school with that were buying drugs, back then as a kid, I couldn't afford it, right? But you watch these kids today drinking 2 or 3 Starbucks a day. Well, that's a $25, $30 habit, right? So if we got our kids hooked on all the different coffee shops and you see lines wrapped around them, the Dutch Brothers and whatever, it's no different with drugs. And that's what's happening. And we can't be naive to that. We can't turn a blind eye to that. And unfortunately, we live in a society today where both parents, there's a lot of single parents out there where they have to work. And so the kids in the fire department, I always heard the term latchkey, right? Latchkey
Yep.
kids.
Yep.
And so you get these kids that have that freedom, no supervision. They get into drugs. They need money. So now they're dealing drugs and it becomes an epidemic. And so that's something as a society we have to figure out, and we have to manage that. It's prevalent out there and our kids are not immune. They're exposed to it every day, and that's the hard reality of the situation.
I like what you pointed out, that it's the parents' responsibility.
Absolutely.
And those discussions around the dinner table are vital because it's a regular occurrence. We're going to have dinner, we're going to sit down, and we're going to just share a little bit about life and what you need to know. And knowledge is power. And if you love your children, you empower them with as much knowledge as you can before you get them out the door, and pray over them from there. So hopefully that's not the end of it. So I learned a lot from my parents after I moved out. Continued to learn from them. But boy, that first 18 years is so important, so vital. So yeah,
it is. And that's where we give our kids the skills to survive and thrive out there as adults. And the real world, like I said, I got adult children. I'm still having conversations with them this day on explaining the realities of the real world we live in, where I've been fortunate working in public safety for 30 years. I get to see what reality really is out there in the bowels of society. And so people that are immune from that are the 9-to-5ers and people working regular jobs. I mean, you guys are out rescuing children. You see it. And so you see the underworld that's out there. And let's just face it, some people don't want to accept that. That's the hard reality about the world that we're living in. There's evil out there, and they're, I hate to say it, but they're after our children.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And that's a whole nother thing. But I mean, it's fascinating to me, the job of the firefighter, because when our bodies fail us, or when somebody T-bones us, we're sitting at a red light, minding our own business. My wife's been hit from behind by a guy who's in this country illegally, without a license, without insurance or anything. He hit her at almost 50 miles an hour when she was sitting at a dead stop, and it totaled the vehicle. It harmed her severely. But in these types of situations that we may not anticipate, man, sometimes on our best day, but usually on our worst day, firefighters are there. And you guys see that cross section of, heart attacks happen to everybody.
We're not immune.
Right. Accidents happen to everybody. And so I imagine you guys see everything. I've rolled with you guys once and saw quite a bit just in one night. And it was fascinating. So I think there's a lot more to unpack in this discussion. I think a lot of it we're going to have in the second half here, but I want to get into drown proofing the children and, pool safety and, vehicles and all this other stuff. I took my son, and when he was about to get his driver's license, I took him into a neighborhood that was under construction that had no traffic in it. And I made him do some basic vehicle dynamics training on how to control the vehicle. Here's how you stop and turn under stress. And here's how you turn around quickly and these kinds of things. And I made him back up all through this neighborhood, making turns and all. He got to where he could stop and steer and reverse that vehicle very, very effectively. And so I have a lot more confidence in him. But Steve, is there anything that you want to say before we wrap this first half on how people can support their local firefighters, or what would you have people know before we sign off?
I would say to the communities out there, go say hi to your fire department. Get to know your fire department. A lot of people don't really understand what the fire department really does today. Once again, going back to cliches, rescuing the cat out of the tree, and what you see on TV where the fire department rolls out. And, we're one of the last, I would have to say, we're one of the last organizations in the United States, besides, not even the police department can say this. We're probably it. We're the only organization, when you call us, we're going to show up in 4 to 5 minutes and solve your problem. No questions asked. We're not going to ask you for any money. And we're going to bring tremendous resources with us and manpower and resolve your problem to the best we can and stabilize the situation. There's no other organization out there that can say that is equipped and prepared and has a system in place to where we'll be at your house, I want to say 5 minutes or less. We'll solve your worst day for you.
Right.
Not many organizations can say that. So go get to know your fire department, get involved. I know for the fire department I work for, we're a very well-funded organization in one of the largest cities in the United States. So we don't take donations, but what we do, we have charities, we have associations that we form, because that's what we like to do, is we like to give back to the community. We have through our unions, community service fund drives where we're raising money for charities, providing scholarships for kids after the fire, raising resources for people that might have lost everything that they owned. You name it, we're doing these things. And go get to know your fire department. And I don't think you'd regret it. I think you'd be very interested in meeting those guys and gals and seeing exactly what it is and what they do. And take your kids down to the firehouse.
Agreed. I think that's a worthy public service event to carry out and give the love back. Thanks, Steve, for coming on. We're going to do another half with you, so stay tuned. Everybody else, join us next time on Defending Our Children. Welcome, everyone, to Defending Our Children. Today, we have a firefighter and battalion chief, Steve Simon, on with us. I've known Steve for many years and appreciate his service as a firefighter. And I thought it would be really important to learn from a firefighter's perspective, because they see everything. Man, when we have tragedy in our lives, we almost always need firefighters there to help deal with it in one way or another. So Steve, welcome to the show, and maybe tell people a little bit more of what you would have them know about you, and then we'll throttle up.
Yeah, I've been in the fire service now for 30 years. I started out with a smaller department next door to the department I work for now. Did 5 years there, and I think I'm 24 years in with the organization I'm at now. 3.5 more years to go. Looking forward to retirement, being at the back door here. But anyways, I've worked my way all the way up to battalion chief. Started out as a firefighter, became a captain, and rose to the rank of battalion chief. I'm one of the special operation battalion chiefs for the department that I work for. So I'm responsible for, all the technical rescue, the hazardous materials, the sea burn responses, part of a FEMA task force, one of 28 USAR teams that responds nationally when you see all the big disasters that happen in the country. Out of those teams, we do have 2 international teams that travel the world, and I suppose my team could get called up as a backup international team should something happen. Been on a few deployments. The fire service really changed after 9/11, and that's where my position really changed. I ended up, when I went into special operations a lot of years ago, I worked on these trucks that were funded by Homeland Security, these heavy rescues that were called RRT, Rapid Response Teams, that were really a byproduct from 9/11. And that all integrated into Homeland Security. They were funded by the Department of Homeland Security. Fortunately, where I work, we are a border state, so we do get a larger, what they call UASI, or Urban Security Initiative grants through the Department of Homeland Security. And we do have one of the fusion centers that are here, that I have a large Homeland Security department in my organization that's tied in and manages, one of the main managers of that fusion center. So we get a lot of intel that drives some of the things I do, but that's really what my position's about. But I'm a responding battalion chief in a large regional fire department.
Okay, right on. Well, in the last segment, we were able to talk with you quite a bit about the fentanyl and the prescription drugs and all the dangers, how to safeguard the children from it. And so much of it is education, just letting them know the dangers of it, and obviously keeping the stuff out of reach of the little ones and these kinds of things. But having been a Navy SEAL, I look at water safety. I know one time our boy, I was overseas and my family was having a gathering, and as a toddler, he crawled out of the little doggy door toward the pool. And my father-in-law saw him through the window, and they ran out there and made sure he didn't get himself into danger. But I can only imagine some of the things you've seen. But how is it that you see children that might be in harm's way surrounding water features in homes, or what are some solutions along with that, Steve? Maybe we can hit that a little bit.
Yeah, years ago in my organization, I was involved in with our union, and the gentleman I worked for in the labor union, the International Association of Firefighters, ran a pool fence campaign. So we went around with large organizations in the city where I work, local. We raised money to provide pool fencing. And so the region where I work, there's a lot of pools. I mean, in the summer, it's over 110 degrees here. And for the people that do stay here for the summers, you're in the pool. And everybody has a pool. My brother-in-law owns a large pool service company, so you'll never be out of work here. But with that comes pool safety. And so the cities in this area have really beefed up their pool barrier laws, codes, and enforcement. But unfortunately, let's just be honest, those pool fences work, but they're not a foolproof barrier. These kids, in the fire service, with all these drownings, we have, at one time, we were the drowning capital in the country here in this city. And so that became a very large campaign for the fire department that I work for. That's why this pool fence campaign went into effect, and we were giving out pool barriers. We do have a lot of people in this town that can't afford to put a barrier up on their existing pool. You can't build a pool today without putting in those barriers, but they're unsightly. People take them down, and let's just face it, kids are still getting into pools. I'll tell you, one of the newest things I saw responding on a drowning about 2 months ago is we have a lot of Airbnb, VRBO houses now. Mm-hmm. And these houses have been converted over. A lot of them that I've seen don't have the pool barriers. We get called out to drowning. It actually became what we call submersion. The mother and grandmother were cleaning the Airbnb. It was after school, picked up the kids from school, went over to this particular house not far away from the station I worked, and they were upstairs. They were cleaning the Airbnb, and the young kid, can't remember his age, less than 5 years old, maybe 3, got out and was face down in the pool. Thank God his sister saw that, pulled the the kid out of the pool. Mom begun CPR. We got there, kid was breathing, aspirated, and we were able to take over care and rapidly transport the child to the hospital. We actually brought the family back to my station. We got the local news involved. We gave the daughter, the older sister, a life-saving award. She did save her brother's life. Somewhere down the line, the parents had the foresight to have their daughter learn CPR. So we
Wow.
talked about pool barriers, but the biggest thing we can do is everybody should learn CPR. And it was very impressive to see a 9-year-old girl go into that emergency mode, react, not even think about it. You remember being a Navy SEAL or firefighter, you're taught to critically think, but to react and make decisions on a split second and go into action and perform a task or a function.
Right.
And that's what this girl did, where you've seen the other end of the spectrum to where they're calling the fire department and they're pulling the child out of the pool, but nobody knows CPR. And so now that kid has gone, minutes without oxygen to the brain. So really that's it. We need to learn CPR. We need to be teaching CPR in the schools. It should be a mandatory class. It's these barriers, but most importantly, you have to watch your kids around water. It's
What
just that
about,
simple.
I agree. All great stuff, Steve. What about some of these drown proofing courses for toddlers? I've seen some pretty impressive videos where little tiny children, they can put them in the pool and they just flip over on their back. They learn how to float.
Yeah.
At least buy them some time.
Yeah, that's the other thing I would recommend. Living here where I live, my girls were little. We always had pools, and that was one of the very first thing my wife and I did back in the day. Was we drown proofed our kids, and they knew how. If they fell in the water, they knew how to get on their back. They knew how to get to the edge. They knew where the steps were. I still worried and I still watched my kids around water, but it did give me a level of confidence knowing that, God forbid something happened. I did everything I could as a parent to give my kids a fighting chance. And like I said earlier in the first episode we did, I have adult children now. Thank God we made it through, right?
Yeah.
And now they have children. So
yeah. Well, right on. Well, good job, Steve. And I hope that helps some other people. Everybody stay tuned. We're going to be right back with more with Steve Simon on Defending Our Children. Welcome back to Defending Our Children, everyone. We're on with a firefighter and battalion chief, Steve Simon. We're talking about ways to defend our children from all kinds of threats. It stands to reason that Steve knows a little bit about fire danger. So, Steve, what have you seen out there with little ones, with fire? Man, how do we get really smart and educate our children and protect them from various types of fire threats?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Craig. It's like owning a firearm, right? When you have children and you own a firearm, you have to make sure that the firearm is locked up. They don't have access to it. And they have to understand that that's not a toy. That's a tool, right?
Right.
Once I said earlier in one of the episodes that we take things for granted, right? And it's real easy to take a lighter for granted, a book of matches for granted, even a gas stove, right? You just think when you see these items and they're laying around, I mean, who really thinks about locking up a lighter, right? But hey, let's face it, man, kids are fascinated with fire. I know when I was a child, I loved playing with fire. I got my stories where I could talk about certain things I lit on fire. I got in trouble. And thank God I got caught and I got in trouble and I got educated and it taught me about fire. My dad has the same stories as a kid. And I think we all share that fascination of fire. So we have to understand that as parents and adults, our kids have that. So when you see a lighter or matches, you have to teach them about that. You have to, unfortunately, put those things up. And I remember being part of a program years ago when I first came on the fire department. I think it was called Fire Pals. And we would take these kids, they would get in trouble with the courts for lighting something on fire. And then they'd have to come spend a weekend with us down at our administration. So we did an 8-hour Saturday. We taught them about fire safety. not only did we teach them about fire safety, we taught them about the judicial system. This is what happens when you get arrested, and here's how the courts work. And excuse me, you don't want to go through this process. And then we also taught them that you could kill yourself, you could hurt yourself, or you could get somebody killed. So once again, it's that simple. I think these are items that we take for granted because let's face it, kids start fires. They're fascinated with them.
Yeah, I used to sit in the driveway and burn my little plastic army men and all kinds of, things. Okay. Well, are there evac plans or any basic things? Let's say it's not the child's fault and they're not going to play with fire. Let's just say there's an electrical fire or some sort of ignition that causes the house to ignite. What are some basic things we should teach our children? Like, how do they get out? What are some basic principles, basic procedures?
Yeah, so what we have to do, we have to teach the kids what to happen, what to do when something like that happens, when the house does catch on fire. One of the things back in the day we would teach these kids, have a meeting place, get out of the house, stay low, crawl, stay underneath the smoke, get outside, go to the mailbox. Families need to teach your kids what to do, how to get out of the house. If you have a second floor, buy one of those ladders that chain ladder that goes out the window. Teach your kids how to do that. Teach them how to open a window. Sometimes it might be as simple as them closing a door. Don't hide under a bed. Get outside. The other thing we teach children when a house catches on fire, if mom and dad aren't out or Fluffy the dog didn't make it out, do not go back in. Wait till the fire department gets there. Let us know. We'll go in and we'll locate the pet or a family member or whoever that might be. Also, most importantly, and I'll tell you this, we just had one of these fires not too long ago. I wasn't part of it. A handful of children died in there, and a father. You have to make sure these smoke detectors work because once again, these things do save lives, but everybody has this attitude that it's not going to happen to me. And if that were the truth, I wouldn't have a job.
Yeah, I suppose that is true. Well, look, Steve, though, but why, smoke detectors save lives, but why is it that they conspire against us and only start beeping when the battery goes low? It's in the middle of the night. Why does it seem like that's always the case?
I'll tell you what, man, if I had those answers, I probably wouldn't be working for the fire department right now. I'd probably be sitting on the beach in Maui.
Well,
yeah, why does it scare our dogs so badly? Just a little beep. Our dogs freak out.
Well, gentlemen, I do have something to add to this. I live in a neighborhood of 230 houses. Okay. In the past 5 years, there have been 5 fires.
Yeah.
In the past 5 years, 2 lightning strike, 1 cigarette smoke, 1 lint fire just happened 2 weeks ago, lint fire next block over. And then one of them, we have a house back in the woods and the kids had a block party back there and they burn it down. So, I jokingly keep telling my neighbors I'm going to start selling them supplemental fire insurance, as a reoccurring revenue. Anyway, so for those folks that are out there that say it can't happen to you, I mean, all our neighbors were all freaking out about fire these days, especially since like 4th of July is coming up and they're going to be firing out fireworks.
Yeah, and I'll tell you to that point, Forrest, you don't want to be in that situation. I mean, you probably saw it with your neighbors. I've seen it hundreds of times when you roll up on these fires and somebody's house or business is burning and they're standing outside. You're watching them go through the emotions of losing everything they own. And so my department years ago, we had a program called After the Fire. I worked back when I first came on in the fire service. We had a very progressive fire chief. We still have progressive fire chiefs in my organization, but one of his things was he recognized back in the day what we used to do when you would call us and your home was burning, we would roll up. These firefighters would get off the truck, stretch hose lines, put the fire out. You'd be standing on the curb. You just lost everything you owned. Maybe it's a Monday night. You got to be at work Tuesday morning. Your clothes are burned up, your car's burned up, you just lost your house. We would roll our hoses up, put them back on the fire trucks, get in the fire trucks and drive away. The call really, and we thought the call was over, but that's really when the call was beginning. So we put in back in the day, we called them alternative response vans. Now they're called community response vans, and they're spread between the fire department and the police department to where that's really when the call began. Is now, instead of rolling up our hoses and get them on the truck, we would get the truck ready and get the truck back into service. But we had to help these people out. We had to bring counselors out on these vans. Where are they going to sleep tonight? How are we going to get them to work the next day? What do they need for transportation? Who's going to board up the house? You got calls to the insurance company. So now that's a service that our fire department that I work for, that we provide, to where we call it after the fire. And so now we have to really help these people start getting their lives put back together. And because let's face it, man, if you just lost everything you own and these firefighters came, did a great job, put the fire out, and they get back on the truck and you're standing there on the curb, where do you go? What do you do?
Yeah.
Your life has just been destroyed overnight.
Yeah. I tell you what, if I were an employer, I would not want my employee at work hours after he or she just lost everything,
Yeah.
devastated by a house fire. Man, here's wishing and praying it never happens to anybody else. We know it's a reality, but what a tragedy. I grew up being very, very diligent against house fires because I think it was probably a smoke detector sales pitch, but it was a video. Somebody came over a neighbor's house and I was over there playing, and it terrorized me. It showed all the different ways that house fires can ignite and
Oh
all
yeah.
the tragedies. And I was like, okay, man, I'm aware. So I was always on my family about fire safety, man. And I'm kind of like a drill instructor on that aspect, because man, I don't think you can be too safe against that. It's just that's a devastating occurrence. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back with more from Steve Simon on defending our children. Welcome back to Defending Our Children. This is our last segment with firefighter and battalion chief Steve Simon. Steve, I want to talk a little bit now about vehicle safety. It's important that we teach our youth before they are driving, proper driving skills and responsibility, ethics, rules of the road and how not to get into road rage, and also vehicle dynamics. I've been through, a dozen different driving schools over the years. And man, it's important to be able to control that vehicle and when you need to turn or stop suddenly. So that's a whole different thing. But let's scale it down to the little ones for starters. What type of things do we need to be aware of and ensure that are in place, procedures or tools or whatever, to ensure the safety of our little ones and surrounding vehicles?
Yeah, that's a really good topic, Craig, and I'll tell you why. And Forrest, until I got in the fire service and something I watched come to fruition in my career, believe it or not, we have guys and gals that are called car seat technicians. Who would ever thought there's car seat technicians out there, right? And I believe, don't quote me on it, but to become a car seat technician, when our firefighters go through that certification, I believe it's a week long. So that's something my organization does. We used to have certain fire stations where the public could come to and where we had a car seat technician and they would install the car seat. Now the fire department I work for, we have a car seat phone number where they have to call and they have to schedule an appointment. And then one of our car seat technicians, who is a firefighter, will properly install that car seat. I had no idea that it was that technical to properly install a car seat. But I have seen, and I've experienced it myself, when my girls were young, they were both in their car seats, and somebody ran a red light and T-boned my wife and myself and my two girls. Not a scratch on anybody. They were properly secured in their car seats. Probably saved their lives. So that's one of the things you really have to make sure that car seat is installed properly. And for your listeners, I would say, whatever city you're in or rural community, see if there's a car seat technician out there and really do some research before you just pull that car seat out of the box and throw it in the back seat. One of the things I did see periodically in the fire service is some of these parents, they wait until they had the baby and hey, they'll come by the fire. Is there a car seat technician here? I got to go pick up my wife from the hospital. Got to get those car seats in.
That's a good reason to go and visit your fire department.
Sure, if they offer that.
Yeah. See if they have that.
That's like a Three Little Pigs standard, like, prep prep now, because it's,
Yeah.
you will be tested later. Well, cool. Well, I teach a hard target training class, and it's all about situational awareness and threat recognition, how to respond when your heart rate is spiked. And I teach people to breathe their heart rate down so that their cognitive capabilities return, so that they can utilize their brain and identify solutions. In a fire, I know a lot of people, their heart rate spikes, and the body shunts off the blood flow to the outer cortex, frontal lobe of the brain, and people become very, very dull intellectually for a period of time when they're
Sure.
still amped like that. And there's a reason people say calm down and relax, take a few deep breaths, because we know that people become more intelligent again when they do relax, and it's all got to do with blood flow and to the brain. So is there anything that you've seen like that I can imagine people jumping out of a fire or a vehicle that may be on fire or something, but they're in the middle of the highway, then an 18-wheeler hits them. And
Yeah, not even with a vehicle just being on fire. One of the things people have to realize that if you do get hit, I mean, you got to get out of the roadway, and not even being in an accident or the vehicle being on fire is, one of the things, talking about protecting our children. One of the things I taught my girls at a very young age when they started driving cars, getting a flat tire. I always said to my girls, hey, if you're on the freeway and you get a flat tire, drive to the nearest ramp, get the car off the freeway, because we see it. We see it here where somebody's changing a tire on the side of the road, especially on the freeway, I-10, the 17, and they get hit. And especially the day. Here's something we need to talk about as well with distracted drivers. I mean, we see it. Everybody's on their cell phones. You see people looking at the I want to say the GPS on their cell phones, very distracted. And so, especially when you see emergency vehicles, that's one of the biggest dangers we face when we're operating out in the roadways, is these distracted drivers. You'll see fire departments today where they're taking old fire trucks and they're making them blocker trucks. And that's what we do. We park our fire apparatus in a way to protect our firefighters operating out in that traffic. So we use the truck as a barrier to protect us. But when you're in an accident or a car fire, you don't have that. And that's where people, when you talk about they're not thinking straight because they just took an impact and they got hit. You really got to get your wits about you and look at your surroundings and that situational awareness. You got to get out of the roadway. You got to get out of traffic. You got to get away from the car, because somebody might be looking at the red lights or whatever, and they're plowing into you. It's very common. It's something that we see. So that's really a good point that you bring up, Craig, is it's that situational awareness when you're in these roadways.
I had that
drivers.
Yes, sir.
I had that opportunity yesterday because my daughter, who I sent to go get gas in her car, she went to pick up a friend first and ran out of gas on the side of the road. It was in a turn lane. So I'm over there with the gas can and servicing the car. We went to the gas station after that, and it was a teaching moment for us.
Oh, absolutely.
In my mind, if you would have gotten gas like I told you, you wouldn't be in this situation.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I think in any sudden violent confrontation, whether it be, and car wrecks certainly do that. I've seen numerous people, and I'm not a firefighter, after a wreck, they're rattled and they're not thinking straight because their heart rate is screaming because it's been so upsetting. Yeah. And, one guy was standing in a puddle of gasoline, the size of a bedroom. He's standing right in the middle of it. His car had hit another truck and ruptured some fuel cans. And he was shaking, and he started putting a cigarette in his mouth and was going to go light it. And I ran at him and I bear hugged him and I ran him out of that puddle. And I just barked at him, "Stop what you're doing." And I went into a Marine Corps drill instructor mode and just took over because he was going to light everybody on fire. And so that's another thing I think we can teach our children, that, hey, when you're rattled like that, your heart rate spikes and you become a little bit of a dummy for a while. In fact, very much a dummy So until your heart rate returns to normal. So you really have to concentrate on breathing, relaxing and breathing, slowing your breathing down to bring that heart rate back down so all the lights come on intellectually again. So, Steve, we appreciate you being on the show. And you shared something last segment I'd like for you to share again. And how is it that we can love back on our firefighters and support our local firefighters?
Just come out, go visit your local fire station and get to know them. You know, go to their website, see what they have to offer, see what their charities are. I will tell you this. Here's one of the things we've learned just in today's world. If you want to bake the firefighters cookies or bring them something to the fire station, a lot of them, they do like that stuff. Just make sure it's sealed up, it's packaged, it's from a grocery store. We just don't know what's being made in these kitchens anymore, to where we can't trust the food anymore being brought in. So we like to see it packaged and sealed up. That's one word of advice. But yeah, go get to know go pay a visit to your fire station. Don't go between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because they're napping. They take naps in the afternoon because they're going to be up during the night running calls and taking care of you. It's a great organization to go out and see what they have to offer and how you can get involved.
All right. Well, thank you for your service out there, and thank you for coming on the show and sharing a lot of these experiences and tips. So everybody, that's it from Steve Simon today. So join us next time on Defending Our Children.